Okay, our audio manager is hooked up, we've got our mixers ready, so now we're ready to start adding sound effects into our scene. We just created the awake function, which assigns our audio manager as the active instance in the scene, so we'll only have one at any given time. And now for us to be able to play sound effects, we need to give ourselves a function that anything can call. And that's going to be a little public function. So we'll say public void, and we'll call it play sound effect. This function will allow us to play a sound effect in our visual novel, and we're going to change this up a little bit in a second, but first let's talk about how this is going to work. As you know, in Unity, for you to play any kind of audio, we need an audio source, and we could go ahead and come through our audio manager and add ourselves an audio source component, but I'm not going to do that because I want every sound effect and every musical track to have its own sound source, so we're going to be creating them on the fly. And if we're doing that, we're going to be creating objects to hold those audio sources and represent those sounds. Which means we're going to have a lot of objects, potentially, that might get generated in the scene, and I would like those to be children of the audio manager, whether they be sound effects or music, ambience, voices, whatever, so that way we can keep track of them and keep them nicely ordered and organized inside of our hierarchy. So when we play a sound effect, I want it to parent itself to the audio manager and also to a child of the audio manager specifically for sound effects. For that to happen, we need a reference to an object that's going to hold the sound effects. So we can go ahead and make this private because nothing else will need to access it. It's going to be a transform, and we'll call this the SFX root, as it will be the root parent for all sound effects. And in Awake, if we do have an instance, or if this is the instance that's been created, then let's go ahead and create that root. So SFX root will equal a new game object, and I wanted to have a particular name. Let's give ourselves a constant up above. So public, we can actually make it private, constant string, and this will be the SFX parent name. And that's just going to be SFX. Okay? And then when we create this new object for the root, it's going to be called that SFX parent name. And we're just going to grab the transform off of that newly created object. So there we are. And then SFX root dot set parent, and we're going to parent it to this audio manager. So that means when we run our scene, our audio manager gets thrown in the don't destroy on load list, and we also get a child called SFX. Good so far. Now for us to play a sound, we need to know what sound we're trying to play. And anything that we're going to be loading from our dialogue files, I can't stress it enough, you've heard it before and you'll hear it more after this, because I need to reiterate it. Anything that's going to be loaded from our dialogue is not going to have a direct reference, so it needs to be loaded from resources, which means we need a path to load this sound from. We can either pass in a string for the file path, or we can pass in the audio clip itself, but we're going to start with a file path. So let's add ourselves a string for the file path. We need to import some sound effects and figure out what the path is going to be to load these things. Real quick, you'll also notice that whatever you had open inside of the project view, when we created the mixers, you're now going to have a mixer asset here. So since that's not really a script, I'm going to move that into our main configuration folder. That way, it's in the same place with our character config and our dialogue system configuration, and then we have our mixer configs. Okay, so let's import those sounds. So I have a folder here that we're going to import some sounds from. I've got some that I'm going to import into my project, which are purchased assets, but I'm also going to have some freely downloadable assets, like we do in the previous videos, that you can get inside of the description. So this will contain an audio folder inside of our resources, and in audio, we have music, which has a couple soundtracks. We have sound effects, which we have a couple sound effects in there as well, and we've also got a couple voice lines. So let's go ahead and drag this into our resources folder. I'm going to come down into, where is it? Resources. And just drag that inside of the resources folder. And this might take a moment to import because there are a couple minute long audio files in there for the music. And when we do that, now we have an audio folder in resources with a sound effects folder, and all these different kind of sounds. Now, this is very important. When you import textures and audio, you want to make sure that you import them with the right settings for your project. Now, you can import them at their max settings if you're not worried about memory or performance. But with our sound effects and with music, in order to get the best performance and the best responsiveness, we want to import them the best way. So the Knights of Unity have this blog online, I'll leave a link in the description, where they tell you some pretty good tips for importing your audio files. Now, for sound effects, these sounds are not going to be played a lot, so we can go with option 3 here. For rarely played and short audio clips, which would be for our sound effects, we'll go ahead and use compressed in memory and the 80 PCM compression format. This should give us good performance for our sound effects, and we shouldn't notice any kind of lag or issues when we're importing or when we're loading them from resources in real time and when we're playing them in our visual novel. So for us to do that, we can go ahead and click on Radio Static and just shift-click to the end to highlight all of our assets, and then choose on Load Type, Compressed in Memory, and then we'll go ahead and set the compression format to 80 PCM. And when we're ready, hit Apply, and it will re-import the audio with those new settings. And now all our clips are imported with those settings. And this means when we load sound effects, we're going to be loading them from Audio SFX inside of Resources. So back in the Audio Manager, we call to play the sound effect, so let's go ahead and load the clip. Audio clip equals, or actually, yeah, clip equals resources dot load, and we're going to load it as an audio clip from the file path that we specified. And now we just need to do a quick check. If sound equals null, clip rather, can't keep these names straight. If clip is null, then we know we had a problem. So if we have no clip when we try to load it, we'll log an error, and then we'll go ahead and return nothing. And if we do, now we can go ahead and call another function which will take in a direct audio clip. So public, instead of making this void, why don't we return an audio source? That way, when we call a sound effect, we can get a reference to the audio source that is playing that sound effect. So we'll just change that to audio source from void and return null. And then public audio source, we're going to make another variant of play sound effect, but instead of a file path, we're going to take in a audio clip called clip. And if we make it here, then we'll go ahead and return the play sound effect with the clip instead. So in this function, we're going to go ahead and create that game object and the audio source to play this sound. But we need a name format for all of these sound effects to be created with. We've got the parent name, so let's now make whatever the childs are going to be called. This is going to be a format that we can inject the name of the sound effect into, and just give that as the name of the game object that we create to handle this sound. We'll make another private constant string, and this will be the SFX name format. And simply, that's going to be SFX dash, and inside of brackets, we'll have the squiggly 0. That way, squiggly 0 will be replaced with the name of the sound effect. So we need to get the audio source that's going to play this. So we can say audio source, and this will be the effect source equals new game object, and we're going to use string.format, and we're going to format the SFX name format and pass in the clip.name. When we do that, we want to go ahead and make sure that when this object is created, we add a component of the audio source type, and that becomes our effect source. So now we just need to make sure that our effect source is parented to the effect root. So effect source.transform.setParent, and we're going to parent it to the the SFX root. And we'll go ahead and center it on the root as well. So effect source dot transform dot position equals SFX root dot position. So now it is created, it's parented, and it is centered, along with having the actual effect. So now we can assign that clip to the effect source by saying effect source dot clip equals clip. And now effect source dot play. This will trigger the sound effect to play, and we can go ahead and return our effect source. Let's quickly make a testing script to try this out. Let's go into scripts under the testing folder and create a new C# script called audio testing. And then we'll assign this audio testing script to our testing object in the scene. Now I want to play a Thunder Strong 01 sound effect. So in the testing script, I'm going to have Stella show up on screen, and then we're going to play that sound effect and have her jump in surprise. So to call it, we'll go audiomanager.instance.play sound effect, and then we're going to play the sound effect at that path, which is audio SFX, and then thunder underscore strong underscore 01. And we'll play that in the scene. And there we go. But you'll notice that we have two problems here. The first problem is that sound didn't run through any of the mixers, so it didn't get assigned to our sound effect mixer. We need to fix that. And the second issue, as you can hear, the sound effect is done. It's no longer playing, and yet it still exists in the scene. We should have that get removed once it finishes. Now, fixing these issues is relatively simple. Now, as I think, I will actually add an audio mixer group as a parameter here, because both sound effects and voices would technically be sound effects. So we could play them both with this same command, just by passing in the different path. So let's go ahead and add some variables that will allow us to configure these sounds a little further, and then make sure they get on the right mixer and destroy them if they are not looping sound effects. So the first thing that we're going to want is we get our sound, and then we want an audio mixer group for the mixer, and then we want a float for the volume. So the volume is going to default to 1, and the mixer is going to default to nothing, which means if it's nothing, we will go ahead and make sure that that is the default sound effect mixer. Now let's also give ourselves a pitch. The pitch will default to 1 as well, and then a boolean for loop will default to false. And we want to take these same variables and pass them into the ladder function. So if we load the clip correctly, then we will pass in the mixer, and we will pass in the volume, as well as the pitch, as well as if this loops or not. And so what we're going to do with all that is right down here, after we assign the clip, let's go ahead and assign the mixer. So let's check if mixer equals null, then mixer equals our SFX mixer. By default, it's going to be that. And now to add the mixer to this sound so it plays correctly, we'll say effect source dot audio output mixer group is going to equal the mixer that we have assigned. And then effect source dot volume will equal the volume. And effect source dot spatial blend, let's make sure we set to 0, since this will not be a 3D sound, it will be 2D. And then effect source, we will set the pitch to the pitch that we've provided. And then effect source dot loop will equal loop. And then of course we play the sound effect. Now as far as destroying it once it finishes, we'll only do that if we are not looping the sound. So let's say if not loop, then destroy, and we're going to destroy the effect source dot game object, and we're going to destroy it at the clip dot length and add a second onto it. That way it has a little bit of extra delay there at the end. But this in itself won't actually work correctly, only if we set the pitch to the normal value. If we decide to lower the pitch, then it's going to stretch out the sound, and it's going to finish later than it would at the default pitch. And if we set the pitch higher, it's going to finish faster. So we need to make sure that we account for the pitch inside of the actual length of the clip. So inside of parentheses, before we tack on that additional one, let's divide the clip by the pitch. That way, it doesn't matter if it's lower or higher, if the clip ends faster or later than it should, we'll still get the appropriate destruction time. And now as we run this in the scene, we can see our thunder hits in the sound effects mixer. And our object should destroy once that sound ends. There we go, it has deleted itself. Now let's also do some radio static. Let's get this playing, and this can be a looping sound, so let's go ahead and see what we can do with a looping sound. If we go ahead and play that radio static sound, and then just yield while Stella is saying, I'm going to turn off the radio, but make sure that we specify our loop variable is true, so this sound effect is going to be looping. Then what we have is we have that radio static which is going, and it continues to loop over and over again. So it doesn't actually destroy itself. And she finishes speaking, but it's still rolling. So we need to have a way to stop looping audio clips if we so choose to, or stop them before they've finished. To do that, we're real simply just going to add in one little function, which will be public void, and we're going to call it stop sound effect. And all we need is a name for the sound effect that we want to stop. So we can call that the sound name. So we need to grab all of the sources that are children of this SFX root. So we can make ourselves an audio source array called sources, and set that equal to our SFX root dot get components in children, and we want to get all of the audio sources. So now let's loop through them. For each var source in sources, then we're going to check something. If source.clip.name equals sound name, and what do you think? Should we make this lowercase, case insensitive? I think so. I think we should. So I'm going to say that sound name equals sound name dot to lower. That way it's case insensitive. So if clip.name dot to lower equals the sound name, then we want to go ahead and destroy this thing. So we can say destroy, and we'll go ahead and destroy the source.game object. And here, we could continue looping through to destroy every single one that has that sound effect, or we could go ahead and simply return if we've found the first one. I think that's the route I'm going to run. Now, if I decide to pass in an audio clip instead, let's just add a way for us to do that as well. So public void stop sound effect. And instead of taking in a string for the name, we're going to take in an audio clip, and then all this is going to do, we're just going to make this a one-liner pointing to stop sound effect, passing in the clip.name. That way we can either use an audio clip or the name of the source that we want to stop. And so if we want Stella to turn off the audio source, then what we're going to do is we're going to say audio manager dot instance dot stop sound effect, and we're going to stop the radio static. And once we do, I'll just have Stella say it's off now so we can see that it should be working. Okay, so we've got radio rolling, and now let's go ahead and click that. Okay, it's off now. We have stopped the audio source. So there we go, that's how we can place sound effects inside of our visual novel. In the next part, we're going to add in a little shortcut to play voices instead. I'll see you then.